I'm quite confident that Putin is not in a position to defy Russia when he has been given the go-ahead to have his war in Ukraine if he wants,
Yeah.
but on the provision that he does not use nuclear weapons. Were he to try and break that, they would say no. And if he had a really serious clash with China, then Russia would be diminished in the process. And he's not going to risk.
This is Rod Liddle on Times Radio. Good afternoon. We are moving swiftly and cheerfully into the apocalyptic section of the programme in just a moment, but later in the hour, writer Rachel Cook on female friendship. And you'll get album recommendations, old and new, before Alexis Conran takes over at 1 p.m. and I go home. But the world spins more precariously than ever this year, and we are closer to World War III than at any time since the early 1980s and perhaps before. The hands of the doomsday clock, a confection of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, stands at 90 seconds to midnight, the closest to Armageddon they have ever been. Some Scandinavian countries are already handing out iodine tablets to their citizens and telling them what to do in the event of a nuclear strike, while defence experts in the West, including those at NATO, believe that the risk, particularly from Russia, is real, present and imminent, and that Europe has not quite woken up to this fact. The problem, of course, is a noisily aggressive Russia, making ground in its illegal war in Ukraine and threatening nuclear destruction on any who might try to halt its deadly incursion. And then there's a similarly aggressive, if more quietly spoken, China, an economic giant with eyes on expansion as well as Taiwan. Add into the mix a newly elected and arguably unpredictable US president, and one has to ask, how do we navigate through these rather choppy waters? Should we be seeking a relationship with Moscow and Beijing? Is there really a feasible alternative to doing so? How real is that danger? And I'm joined by the former Foreign Secretary, Lord Owen, who has an excellent book out, Riddle, Mystery, Enigma, which is a history of British and Russian relations over the last 200 years. So could not be better placed to answer these questions. But also Humphrey Hawksley, China correspondent for the BBC for years. He even opened the first BBC bureau in China, TV bureau. He is now an author of geopolitical thrillers as well as works of non-fiction. Many welcomes to both of you. Thanks for coming in. Lord Owen, Russia, what approach should we take to it now? And should we become involved in arguing with Ukraine that perhaps discussions might be forthcoming to end the war there?
Well, if we can end the war in Ukraine, we should, and it should be tried, and it's clear that Trump will try, but it's not easy to end this war, but it's important that it should end, and the realities of life are that if China wants that war to end, it will end. And I would
if China wants it to end.
China wants it to end. If I was a diplomat, I'd be spending quite a lot of my time on dealing with Ukraine through China.
Oh, that's interesting. Because your argument, I think, is that effectively China gave the green light to Russia to invade Ukraine so long as nuclear weapons weren't involved.
Exactly. And of course, we're now hearing voices from Russia, mainly previous politicians, arguing for the use of tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine. And they will never get that.
They will never get. You're fairly confident of that, are you?
I'm quite confident that Putin is not in a position to defy Russia when he has been given the go-ahead to have his war in Ukraine if he wants, but on the provision that he does not use nuclear weapons. Were he to try and break that, they would say no. And if he had a really serious clash with China, then Russia would be diminished in the process. And he's not going to risk that.
Because this is another point you make, and a point you make in the postscript to your excellent book, which is that in this partnership between Russia and China, whilst the Russians may have assumed themselves to be the senior partners at one point, that is most definitely no longer the case.
Definitely no longer the case. And it's very significant because China is actually a more sophisticated diplomatic and political force than Russia. And I think that it's years of history.
Yeah.
And when you're dealing with China, you're dealing with a very considered and careful policy. And the United States has recognized that for quite some time. Britain has been a bit slow, and one of the reasons I'm rather glad that the Chancellor didn't cancel her trip to China.
Indeed.
Which would have been read by them as rather weak decision. And to be turned back from the airport, it's far more important to what she's saying in China, and I think it will be sensible things, because she's a sensible woman. And I think that we will slowly get China more and more involved. And the City of London needs China. One of the great advantages of the realism that came over the passage of giving up Hong Kong was the British government decision to welcome everybody who was working in finance in Hong Kong. And a hell of a lot of them are over there, so I look out on the City of London.
Indeed they are. I mean, one other thing, a point you make in the book, which is an interesting one, and one which is sometimes made, but by people who are later accused of being Putin apologists, which I know, obviously, you're not, but which is that we ought to try, it seems to make total sense to me, that one ought to try to see the world the way that both Putin and indeed the Russians see it. And that means remembering one's history, and a long history of British perfidy, beginning back in, you might argue, 1917, 1918, but all the way through, that we have rebuffed. We rebuffed Putin when he asked to join NATO. We told him to get in a queue behind Lithuania and Latvia, which didn't go down terribly well with Vlad. So what do you mean when you say see the whole picture from the Russian perspective? What do you mean?
Well, we see NATO enlargement as a democratic decision, countries wanting to join NATO. And how could we say no? They become new countries often, or developed countries. They want to be. How can we say no? But Russia sees that as threatening. And then they can point to various commitments which we made in the past that we would never take NATO right up to the borders of Russia. It was said in good conscience, but the world moves on.
The world moves on,
and I think we shouldn't get too embarrassed by it, but we understand why they're irritated by it. They can be irritated, but they don't need to go to war because of such a decision. Anyhow, they won't go to war. There is no going to be imminent war. We're in danger of talking ourselves into imminent war, but it's not going to happen.
Are we?
Yeah, I think we are honestly in danger. It's something you've got to be careful about. War talk has its own dimension. And giving the acceptance that war is tolerable. War is not tolerable in the age of nuclear weapons, and it's not any secret that those Russians, who some of them in quite senior positions in the past, who are arguing that nuclear weapons should be used to settle the Ukrainian war, are effectively asking for a world war.
Yeah. Humphrey, do you think China has always seen itself as a senior partner in this relationship with Russia? And is the partnership as close as David suggests?
I think it's as leveraged as Lord Owen suggests.
Transactional.
Certainly transactionally leveraged. And back when there was the Sino-Soviet short-lived pact in the 1950s and 60s, it was the other way round. Yes. And when Mao Zedong went to Russia at that stage, he was humiliated by Stalin, and they remember that. There is no love, there's no real shared values there, and there are unresolved border disputes, but in this case, it is Russia that needs China, and China knows that.
Yes, I forget the description of the border between the Soviet Union and China. It was something like 9,000 miles of hatred, suspicion and paranoia, or words to that effect.
I think China still has a historical claim on Vladivostok.
Right, well indeed.
So yes, China. I agree with Lord Owen that China is critical to this, but China is also doesn't want to yet take the sort of global responsibility that running a new world order means. So it has promised this to Russia. It has said that it's not going to do this, but it's not going to put its head above the parapet. Syria is a key example to this, in that half of the vetoes that it's ever used in the United Nations permanent Security Council thing, it's used its veto 16 times. Half of those was pledging for Syria,
Right.
signing strategic pacts with Syria. But when Assad went, China just stepped back and let it happen. So the global south, that multipolar world we're talking about, looks at China and says, yes, we like its money, we like its long thinking, we like its lack of democracy if we're at that stage of development, but we don't like its security. We want to stick with the Americans for that.
It is interesting, isn't it? The scene from here, and this is a question for both of you in a way, that it's a rather lazy assumption to make that both Russia and China have become examples of Asian democracy, i.e. they're not democratic, they're authoritarian. Is there a kind of convergence that you see, Lord Owen, between the political systems of Russia and China? That Russia, whilst not wishing to reinvent the Soviet Union, which Putin has no time for, but nonetheless there is an authoritarianism there which lends itself to how we see Asian countries.
I don't think all of Russia's important politicians have yet made the transition that they are basically, and I use the word, a tough word, subservient to China.
Yeah.
So I think there are voices in Russia, and powerful ones, but I think Putin is a very intelligent person. I mean, if you look at the way he handled the whole question of when he basically faced a revolt in the Russian military, and the Russian military were moving in on Moscow. He handled it brilliantly. Never underestimate Putin's intelligent handling of issues. He, in my view, has come to privately within his own head that he has to carry he has to carry China with him on any major international policy now.
We'll come back to both Humphrey and Lord Owen to talk more about this and more about what Putin's next moves might be and the dangers inherent in the current situation, not least from Humphrey Hawksley, who will undoubtedly tell us about the plots of a few of his wonderful geopolitical thrillers, which have had the Third World War based in, I think, Svalbard, the Bering Strait, Delhi, North Korea.
North Korea, yes.
And there must be at least one.
Taiwan Strait.
The Taiwan Strait. So there's all those to visit. So that's in a moment. Now, this is Ron Little here at Times Radio, and I still have with me, mercifully, Lord Owen and Humphrey Hawksley. We're discussing whether we're about to be annihilated in the next year or so, or maybe the next couple of years. But more importantly than that, how might we forge some sort of relationship with those two large beasts from the East, Russia and China? The problem with Russia, of course, is that Vladimir Putin is intent upon re-establishing Russia's role in the world as a global superpower and redressing some of the what he will have seen as the power that was lost under Boris Yeltsin and obviously his bête noire, Mikhail Gorbachev, that Russia had lost and was taken advantage of by the West during those years. Should we have, in 1994 or 3, have made overtures to Russia to join NATO?
I don't think quite as far as that, but I believe we could have handled Yeltsin very much better. Yeltsin was basically a figure that we didn't give enough help to. He was a really modern man, and it was taking Russia into the new world in a way that would have actually enhanced Russia's position, and we should have helped Yeltsin. So I think there was a great mistake. We flooded Moscow with spivs.
We did.
An old-fashioned word.
We did.
But some of them are looking through the window out there in the city of London.
Yes.
I was there actually doing business and close to Gazprom at the time and was involved in business. And what came from the West in terms of market economics was everything that was wrong for Russia at that particular moment. And there was a horrible misjudgment, and mainly coming from the United States because they were the main power.
When we look at the Ukraine war, there are problems there, aren't there, if you come to a settlement, because it is almost impossible, I would have thought, to come to one which doesn't in some way reward Vladimir Putin. Because we ought to be clear that whilst the invasion was wrong, the majority of people in Crimea probably do see themselves as Russian. And that's true to a greater or lesser degree in Luhansk and Donbass. Is that how you would say it, Humphrey, do you think?
Well, I think that if you look at the world, it's full of changed borders. I mean, Finland has lost a whole heap of its territory to Russia. And this is the situation that we're in at the moment. And I think, as Lord Owen and you say, is that either you keep fighting on or you have a frozen conflict there and everybody will stop fighting. And this is what happened in Vietnam in 1954 briefly, and then there was what happened in Korea. And they had those two end of wars there that were put together in a single peace conference in Geneva that sort of sorted that out. And I think as we're talking, you're particularly talking about how close are we to nuclear war? Well, we are getting close to it. And one slip up, one wrong press of the button, one wrong poll from Elon Musk or something saying, do we want to kick butt in China or something like that, that you can see the Western hubris come on. And if you look at the past wars like Iraq, like the Gulf of Tonkin incident that sparked off the Vietnam War, both fabricated, both pushed through on Western democratic votes, both with high values. We are in that situation now. But as Lord Owen says, we're in a nuclear situation now. And therefore, it's very dangerous that if there was a nuclear war here and somebody pressed the wrong button, we could all be annihilated within a few hours. It's not a matter of that the whole world could be sort of a nuclear apocalypse, dystopian place within 24 hours. Society would not be. So we need to find a way to stop that. And as good a way as possible would be to, instead of having the Congress of Vienna, the UN Paris, the Treaty of Paris, the Treaty of San Francisco, these constructs after the war, let's have it now, before the war breaks out. Because we know that you have big beasts like Russia and China that are dissatisfied with the world order at the moment. Right, let's write a new one.
And more than that, because there are plenty of countries, of course, which are arguably some of them client states of China, some of them client states of Russia, but also some of them unaligned.
Exactly.
The majority of the world's population lives in countries which have not objected to the war in Ukraine. Yeah. Whether it's South Africa or India, which is a traditional ally of Russia, Pakistan, none of them have actually objected, and some have vetoed any censure of Russia. Lord Owen, it is difficult then, isn't it? If we need to repair in some way a relationship, we need to make a relationship, a new relationship between the West, America, Europe, and Russia. Is that possible to do while Vladimir Putin is in power?
Yes, and I think that Trump has indicated he's going to raise this day one, the 20th of this month, and I think he's going to do it in a subtle way. He is going to ask a general to look at the whole issue with a view to making new boundaries, which are stable boundaries between Russia and Ukraine, so that we won't be looking at the present boundaries, which are the fighting boundaries.
Because Ukraine's bigger than it's ever been now, isn't it?
Yes, they will be looking at the long-term boundaries between Russia and Ukraine, which satisfy both sides that it's a stable one, because it's in our interests. And I believe that will be done. I believe it will be done by a military figure. And that's what we want. It's take the politicians out of this. Give both these countries stable boundaries, and the map will look very different. And that could happen very quickly, the start of this type of dialogue. Trump has been well advised, or his gut instinct is a good one, as to how to handle this. He's made quite clear he's going to deal with it on day one, but it will be not finding a solution, it will be finding a mechanism to find a solution. And there's one out there, and that is stable, secure boundaries between Ukraine and Russia.
It is interesting that whilst I read, particularly in the liberal papers, a fear and a worry about the incoming Trump presidency, everybody I've spoken to who has a big background knowledge of foreign affairs is slightly cheered by Donald Trump's arrival. On a solely pragmatic basis, not necessarily on an ideological basis. Do you share that, Humphrey?
I do. I think that there was hubris amongst the liberal elite, whatever you want to call it. The establishment that was running the West was rampant with hubris, thinking this is the way we do it. The spivs that Lord Owen talked about going into Russia, they went into Iraq as well.
Yes, they did.
They went into Syria. They're sitting sort of just out of Oxbridge, sitting in Somalia, telling them how to run their country there. He's put a coach and horses through that, and he does it in this dramatic way, like buying Greenland and this sort of thing. But when you drill down on it, he's shaking up the establishment, and he's making Japan and South Korea think about their security. He's making Europe think about its security. He's making Japan think about, how do we do this? How do we cut these deals so that we don't have to spend so much on defence? So whatever his policies are, they might be way off the wall, but they're making the rest of us think about how we should actually move forward.
And it has sharpened the Western concentration a little bit, that NATO and America has been taken for granted for too long, and that certain countries, Spain, Italy, Germany, need to up their game when it comes to paying the full amount to contribute to NATO.
I think you'll see that because the German election is going to have a right-wing government, and I think they will accept that Germany has been underpaying on defence for a very long time, and I think you'll see a meaningful military arrangement between Poland and Germany emerge as a consequence of those elections. But coming back to your central point, and it's an extremely important one, there's a new thinking in the world, and thank goodness it's come.
Yeah.
It happens to have come from business. And it's not unusual at business who do it. I mean, I spent quite a lot of my life, people never realize, I had to earn my living, and I earned my living in business. And there is a lot of intellectual power in business. And the intellectuals themselves, people like, to some extent me, have rather disparaged the fact that business is revealing to us a capacity to think globally. And it's very interesting, you know, now when you think of this concept of Greenland.
Yeah.
This has been pushed by business advisors to Trump just as much as his political advisors.
And it has a sense to it as well, doesn't it?
I think it myself will happen, and I think it should happen. Rather disappointing, the EU sort of
the Danes will be disappointed
reaction,
to hear that.
Absurd. It's big thinking, it's sensible thinking, and it's stable.
So you think Greenland will become a part of the USA?
I believe there will be a new arrangement made. It may be that it will be a part of the next state in the United States, or it could be just a very much closer relationship. It will change anyhow. The Greenland will become a significant building block in the stability of Europe.
Excellent. And look, this has been a fascinating discussion. I've got you here, and I have to ask this because it's not particularly on topic, although it all plays in some way or another. You've always previously supported Britain's membership and the support for the European Court of Human Rights. But there have been problems, of course, and the problems we have at the moment with mass immigration to this country. Are you still a supporter of the ECHR?
Yes, but I believe it has to change. What was introduced in enlightened policy in the late 40s is not appropriate today, and you cannot deal with immigration, as we all have to deal with it, without making some amendment to this important treaty. So I've been against saying get rid of it, walk away from it. That's absurd. Things have to be adjusted, and that treaty should be adjusted by common negotiation, and the sooner the better.
But if it isn't, I mean, because that's the problem, isn't it? There's a certain sclerotic nature to European politics,
yeah.
And there is a European elite which is leftish, centre-leftish. Can that change ever come within the ECHR?
Well, a lot will change, I think, under Germany after the election. I think it's pretty clear that we're going to see a right-wing government, overtly right-wing, with a lot of new thinking coming in. Merkel was, of course, on the right, but you've only got to read Merkel's book to realize that she was a centrist.
Yeah, indeed.
She was not a right-wing person even. And I think you will see a proper right-wing government in Germany, and I think they'll be more realistic. I think they will realize they have to pay more than they've done for European defense, and I think will come with it some new thinking, probably quite soon influenced by new thinking in America.
Brilliant. And just one more very quick thought from you, Humphrey, just to cheer everybody up at home. The Third World War, where's it going to start?
Oh,
You've got a choice. Yeah,
it'll start in the U.S. Congress. There will be an incident, and that will then go on an Elon Muskian type of poll, and the U.S. Congress or the British Parliament will vote through that we go into action somewhere. I suspect it'll start somewhere in Asia too.
There will be no new World War.